Commander Rethok of the Jolian Empire had written exactly 231 military observation reports over his long career, and not a single one of them had ever made him question his own sanity until he set foot on Earth. He stepped off the Coalition shuttle at 0500 hours local time, and the first thing that hit him was the noise. Somewhere in the darkness ahead of him, something was screaming. Not a war scream and not an alarm, just a loud, repeated, very confident scream coming from a large open field where dozens of small human figures were running in a straight line before the sun had even risen. Rethok stood perfectly still and watched them. His junior assistant, a young Jolian officer named Pell, stepped up beside him with a data tablet in 3 of his 4 hands. "Commander," Pell said carefully, "according to the schedule provided by the Academy, this is called morning physical training." "At this hour?" Rethok asked. "Yes, Commander, at this hour, every single day." "And they are being punished?" Pell scrolled through the tablet. "No, Commander. This appears to be their standard daily routine. It is listed under the heading of, and I want to read this exactly as written, Building the Warrior Spirit." Rethok looked at the humans running in the dark and filed his very first field note of the mission. It was a short note. It said, "These beings wake up before sunrise to hurt themselves on purpose, and this is considered a good thing." He underlined the word good and added a question mark after it. The creature doing all the screaming at the front of the group was a human male of impressive size, dressed in a uniform with a wide, flat hat, and he was walking, not running, alongside the cadesses, while shouting things at them in a voice that seemed far too large for one creature to produce. The cadets were shouting back in unison, and their voices were matching his rhythm. "What are they saying?" Rethok asked. Pell tilted his head toward the translator bead in his ear. "They are saying left, 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 right, left, over and over again, Commander." "What does that mean?" "I believe it is a counting method to keep their feet moving in rhythm. They need to remind their own feet which direction to move?" "Apparently so, Commander." Rethok made another note. He was given a tour of the Academy grounds by a pleasant human officer named Captain Okafor, who had a broad smile and the kind of energy that suggested she had already consumed several cups of the hot black liquid humans called coffee. She walked him through the barracks, the simulation halls, the weapons range, and the medical facility with great pride, as if showing off something she had personally built. "Fort Solaris graduates over 400 officers every cycle," she told him warmly, "and every single one of them is trained to function under extreme stress, sleep deprivation, physical hardship, and unpredictable battlefield conditions." Rethok noted that she said this the way a Jolian commander might announce a Medal of Honor. She was proud of the hardship. The hardship was the point. This was already very different from the Jolian military system, where cadets were given regulated sleep schedules, optimized nutrition plans, and calm, structured learning environments designed to maximize cognitive performance. Jolian military doctrine was built on a simple principle. A well-rested, well-fed soldier with a clear plan would always outperform a tired, hungry soldier with no plan. He was beginning to suspect that the humans had not read that doctrine. The real shock came midway through the first morning during what the Academy called the Welcome Endurance Circuit. It was designed, Captain Okafor explained cheerfully, to introduce new cadets and visiting exchange students to the Fort Solaris standard. There were 11 exchange students present from 7 different coalition species, and all of them had come from academies with excellent reputations. There was a Dravathi male, whose species were known galaxy-wide for their powerful legs and high endurance. There was a pair of Kozai females, whose people had been a military civilization for over 3,000 years. There was even a young Vithani officer who had already completed his homeworld's legendary 6-month wilderness survival program. Vrethok stood on the observation platform with a notebook and watched all of them line up alongside 50 human cadets in the early morning light. The drill began with a 5-kilometer run, moved into a series of high obstacle walls, then a long crawl through wet mud under low wire, then a heavy pack carry up a steep hill, and then, for reasons Vrethok could not immediately understand, they were all told to get into cold water. By the third obstacle, 4 of the 11 exchange students had stepped aside. By the fifth, 3 more were sitting on the grass with water and towels, looking at the still-moving humans with a specific expression that Vrethok's translator classified as reluctant respect. By the end, only 2 exchange students were still going. The Dravathi male finished, barely, and sat down hard on the ground with his head between his knees. The other was a human exchange cadet from a separate program, which Vrethok felt was entirely beside the point, but what caught his full attention was not who finished and who did not, it was Cadet Amara Singh. She was one of the smallest humans on the field, not more than 1.5 meters tall, with a frame that the Jolian standard military model would have classified as not optimized for sustained load-bearing activity. She had been at the front of the pack for most of the circuit. She climbed every wall without slowing down. She moved for the mud with what could only be described as complete indifference to the mud. And as she carried her heavy pack up the final hill at the very end of a 2-hour circuit before sunrise on the very first day of a new academy cycle, she was singing. Vrethok leaned forward on the observation rail. He asked Pell what she was singing. Pell listened to the translator for a moment. "It is a very old human song, Commander. It is about a woman who builds a house on a hill and refuses let anyone take it from her." Vrethok watched Cadet Singh cross the finish line, laugh out loud at something a squad mate said, and immediately move over to help a taller cadet who was struggling with a leg cramp. He stood there for a long time after that. Then he opened his field report to a fresh page and wrote 4 words at the top in large letters, underlined twice. The words were, "Do not underestimate them." He had only been on Earth for 6 hours. The second day at Fort Solaris began with a tactical doctrine class, and Commander Vrethok arrived with a fresh notebook, a sharpened stylus, and the quiet confidence of a being who had studied military theory for 40 years. He was about to have that confidence firmly removed. The classroom was a large, well-lit room with rows of seats facing a board at the front. 40 cadets sat with tablets and pens, talking loudly among themselves, until a door at the side opened and a human officer walked in. The officer was a tall woman with short gray hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that made it clear that she had been in the military for a long time and was not easily impressed by most things. Her name was Colonel Hayes, and she had a reputation at Fort Solaris that the cadets seemed to treat with a mixture of deep respect and genuine fear. She placed a single sheet of paper on the desk at the front, looked at the class, and said, "Today's lesson plan is canceled." The cadets went quiet. Vrethok, seated at the back of the room in an observer's chair, looked up from his notebook. Colonel Hayes walked slowly to the center of the room. "You came in here expecting me to teach you something from a book, a set of rules, a known solution to a known problem." She paused. "I am not going to do that, because the battlefield does not come with a book. The battlefield gives you a mess and a clock, and not enough of what you need, and it asks you, what are you going to do about it?" She looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. "So today," she said calmly, "we are going to practice that." What followed was something that Vrethok had no category for in 40 years of military observation. Colonel Hayes divided the cadets into teams of 5 and handed each team a small box. Each box contained a short list of items, and Vrethok, craning his long neck to read the list on the nearest team's table, saw things like 1 length of wire, 2 ration packets, a strip of cloth, a small mirror, a pen, and a half-used roll of tape. Then she put a scenario on the board. The scenario read, "Your unit is cut off behind enemy lines. Your communication equipment is destroyed. You have no weapons. You have only the items in the box. You have 30 minutes to design a plan to signal a friendly unit 10 kilometers away and create a distraction large enough to allow your team to cross an open area without detection. Go." Vrethok read the scenario twice. Then he read it a third time. Then he quietly wrote in his notebook, "This problem has no solution. I have assessed it using 4 separate Jolian tactical frameworks, and all 4 have returned the same answer: retreat or surrender." He underlined retreat or surrender and waited to see what the cadets would do. What the cadets did was argue loudly for approximately 45 seconds and then all start talking very fast at the same time. And then one of them grabbed the mirror and started drawing on it with a pen, and another began unrolling the wire, and a third was squeezing something from the ration packet onto the cloth. Vrethok watched all of this with his full set of eyes, which for a Jolian meant 4 eyes, all open very wide. He had advised Coalition High Command on tactical doctrine on 4 separate occasions, and the idea of approaching an unwinnable scenario as simply a problem I have not yet solved had genuinely never crossed his mind in that specific way. He wrote in his notebook, "Human tactical thinking does not recognize a ceiling. They do not see a limit. They see a wall, and they look for the door in it. This is either the most dangerous or the most valuable quality I have ever observed in a military culture. Possibly it is both." He underlined "possibly it is both" 3 times. Then he turned to a new page because he had a feeling there was a great deal more to write before this assignment was over, and he wanted to make sure he had enough room. He was right about that. Commander Vrethok had studied the military cultures of 29 species over the course of his career, and he understood how each of them structured loyalty and cooperation within a fighting unit. The Dravathi used formal oath bonds recorded in legal documents and witnessed by senior commanders. The Kosi used ancient bloodline allegiances passed down from parent to child over generations. The Vithani used a shared neural signal, a mild biological link that allowed unit members to sense each other's basic emotional states during combat. Each system was logical, measurable, and operated by clear and well-understood rules. What he observed at Fort Solaris over the following 2 days had none of those qualities, and it was somehow the most effective unit cohesion system he had ever seen in his life. It started at breakfast on the 3rd day. Vrek arrived at the mess hall early, as was his habit, and sat at a side table with Pell and a cup of the hot grain liquid humans called oatmeal, which he was slowly learning to tolerate. The cadet tables began filling up around 0600 hours, and the first thing he noticed was the noise. Jolian military dining protocol recommended quiet, efficient mealtimes to allow for mental preparation before the day's activities. The humans had clearly not been given this recommendation because the mess hall sounded like approximately 400 conversations happening at the exact same time, most of them very loud, and several of them involving laughter that seemed physically impossible to produce at that early hour of the morning. The second thing Vrethok noticed was the food sharing. At the Jolian Academy, every soldier received their individually calculated nutritional allocation portioned precisely to their body mass and daily energy requirements. It was a carefully designed system. No one ever had more than they needed, no one ever had less, and the whole process ran smoothly and silently every single morning. At Fort Solaris, Cadet Torres gave half his eggs to Cadet Singh because she mentioned she was extra hungry. Cadet Singh gave Torres her fruit because she said she did not like the way it smelled. Someone 3 tables over slid their whole bread roll to a squad mate without being asked. 2 cadets were sharing a single cup of coffee by passing it back and forth between sentences of conversation without breaking eye contact. Vrethok watched all of this and wrote, "Humans distribute resources without calculation and appear to do this on instinct alone. Follow-up question, is this chaos, or is this a system I simply do not understand yet?" He decided by the end of breakfast that it was a system he did not understand yet. The behavior extended well beyond the mess hall. Wreckage followed Cadet Taurus' squad through their afternoon schedule and observed how they operated outside of formal training hours. When one cadet, a tall young man named Park, struggled through a written tactical assessment and looked like he was heading toward a failing score, two other cadets from his squad stayed in the study room with him for 3 extra hours, going over the material again, slowly and carefully, even though they had both already passed their own versions of the same assessment. They did not do this because they were ordered to. They did not do this because it gave them any official advantage or extra points on any record. They did it because Park was their squad mate and he needed help. Do they receive a reward for this behavior? Rethik asked Captain Okafor later that evening. She thought about the question for a moment. Not officially, she said. They just do it because that is what you do for your squad. Rethik wrote, "There is no formal incentive structure for this behavior, and it happens constantly. I cannot explain it, and it is making me uncomfortable in a way I cannot fully describe." He also could not explain the insults. Jollian military culture had very clear rules about how soldiers addressed each other. You used rank, you used formal titles, and you absolutely did not speak negatively about a colleague's abilities, appearance, or personal decisions. It was a matter of professional respect, and it was considered a basic standard of discipline. The humans called each other terrible things on a regular basis, and then laughed about it. Cadet Torres told Cadet Singh her wall-climbing form looked like a confused crab, and Singh laughed so hard she had to stop walking to recover. Singh told Torres he had the navigation instincts of a sleeping rock, and he looked deeply pleased about this. A senior cadet called a group of juniors the worst collection of disaster humans ever assembled in one location, and the juniors cheered and whooped as if they had just been given a high award. Vrethik asked Pell what was happening. Pell listened to the translator carefully and then spoke slowly. "I believe, Commander, that when a human insults someone they care about, it means they feel comfortable and safe with that person. It is a sign of trust and closeness." Vrethik stared at a cadet who was currently calling his best friend a beautiful disaster with an expression of complete and obvious affection. "Trust," Vrethik repeated slowly. "The worse the insult, apparently, the closer the friendship." Vrethik filed this under a new section of his report that he titled Human Communication Paradoxes, an incomplete list. He suspected the list would grow. The event that truly cracked something open in his understanding came on the 4th evening during a training exercise that had not gone as planned. A squad of 8 cadets was running a timed obstacle relay course when Cadet Kim twisted her ankle badly on the second obstacle. It was not a serious injury, but it was painful enough to slow her to a limp. Under standard time drill protocol, the team had the clear option to continue without her, which would have kept their time competitive against the other squads. They did not take that option. The squad's senior cadet, a young man named Reyes, stopped the entire relay, crouched down next to Kim, checked her ankle with steady hands, and then looked up at the rest of the squad. He said simply, "We finish together, or we do not finish." They finished together. Their time was terrible, nearly twice the target that had been set. They came in last among every squad on the course that evening. Captain Okafor noted the time in her record book with no visible judgment and without a single word of criticism. Vrethik watched Cadet Kim limp across the finish line, surrounded by 7 people who chose a bad time over leaving her behind, and he sat with that image for a very long while. He wrote in his notebook, "In the Jollian model, unit cohesion is built on discipline, shared goals, and respect for hierarchy. In the human model, it appears to be built on something else entirely, something closer to what I would describe in the most careful translation I can find as love. I do not know how to write a standard tactical assessment of love. I have tried twice now, and both times the result has been the same sentence written in large letters. This is not logical, but it works, and I do not know why." He left both attempts in the report. He decided the High Council could figure out what to do with that. Before Commander Vrethik had left Jollian home space for this assignment, his senior briefing officer had handed him a thick document titled Known Vulnerabilities in Human Military Performance. It was 30 pages long and very detailed. The first section, which occupied 12 of those 30 pages, was entirely about fear. The document explained that humans experienced something called the fight or flight response, a biological alarm system that flooded the body with chemicals in response to perceived danger. According to the document, this response could cause poor decision-making, loss of fine motor control, erratic behavior, and in extreme cases, complete and total performance breakdown. It was, the document concluded very confidently, humanity's most significant military limitation. Rethik had read those 12 pages carefully and underlined several passages. He now suspected whoever had written those 12 pages had done all of their research from a very safe and very far distance. The advanced combat training phase of the academy cycle began on the 5th day, and it was a different world from the classroom exercises and endurance drills that had come before. This was live fire training, night operations, close quarter simulation, and what the instructors cheerfully called high-stress scenarios, which Vrethik quickly learned was a human way of saying, we are going to create conditions as close to actual combat as we can possibly make them without anyone actually dying, and we are going to watch very carefully how you respond. The first live fire session went more or less as Brethik had expected, loud, physically demanding, and executed with more outward confidence than several of the cadets probably felt on the inside. But the night operations exercise, which began at 2300 hours and ran until 04 a.m., was something different entirely. The cadets were sent into a large training facility with zero artificial light, complete darkness, and told to locate and extract a simulated casualty from a target building, while a hostile team actively tried to stop them. They had no night vision technology, they had no special equipment beyond what they carried on their person, they had only the natural capabilities of the human eye, which, as Vrethik noted in his report, were genuinely not impressive. Humans had among the weakest low-light vision of any species currently in the Coalition. He watched the exercise through thermal imaging from the control room. The cadets moved through. Commander Vrethak walked into it carrying 47 pages of handwritten notes and the expression of a being who had not slept particularly well in over a week. The council chamber held seats for representatives of all 31 coalition member species, arranged in a great curved arc around a central speaking platform. The lighting was ceremonial and golden, the air was cool and precisely controlled, and the assembled delegates sat with the patient and dignified stillness of people who were very accustomed to very long meetings. Vrethak stepped onto the speaking platform, set down his report, and looked out across the chamber. He had given many presentations over the course of his career. He had addressed high command, war councils, diplomatic committees, and formal review boards. He had delivered bad news and good news and complicated news that required careful framing, and once, memorably, news that was so strange that no one in the room quite knew how to categorize it afterward. He suspected this was going to fall into that last category. He began, "Honored delegates," he said. "I was sent to Fort Solaris Military Academy on Earth with a straightforward brief. Assess the human species' military capabilities and culture, and return with a clear recommendation regarding their readiness for full coalition membership. I was told to expect a report of approximately 3 pages. He paused. I have returned with 47. He paused again. I will do my best to summarize. He started with the facts. He described the physical training standards, the endurance benchmarks, the documented performance numbers, the specific instances of human cadets outperforming species that were, by every known biological measure, better suited to the tasks being asked of them. He presented the data calmly and clearly, and he watched the expressions in the chamber shift from polite diplomatic attention to something sharper and more focused. He described the tactical training, the simulation results, the improvisation exercises, the problem-solving data from Colonel Hayes' class. He told the council about the 3-century-old unwinnable scenario and the 11-minute solution, and the easy shrug that had followed it. A soft murmur moved through the chamber. At that point, the Kelos representative, who held the record that had just been described, straightened very slowly in her seat. He described the unit cohesion patterns, the resource sharing, the voluntary sacrifice of individual advantage for group success, the way human squads behaved under pressure, not like a machine running a program, but like a single living thing with a shared and beating heart. He described the twisted ankle and the last place finish, and the squad that crossed the line together because they had decided that was the only way they were going to cross it. The chamber was very quiet now. He described the fear response data, or rather the complete absence of the performance collapse that the official briefing documents had so confidently predicted. He described Cadet Reyes with her fever, sitting cross-legged on the floor of a room full of chaos, working calmly, finishing fast, and walking out with a grin to say it had been kind of fun. Several delegates shifted in their seats. The Dravathi representative exchanged a quiet look with the Verthani representative that Vrethak's translator described simply as shared unease, and then he set down all of his data sheets. He looked out at the chamber and spoke from the notes he had written in his personal journal, the notes that were not part of the official report, the ones he had written for himself in the quiet hours after midnight at Fort Solaris, when the academy was dark and the cadets were sleeping, and he was sitting alone at a small desk, trying to put into words what he had seen. "I came to Earth," he said, "prepared to evaluate whether humans met the Coalition's standard for military readiness. That was the wrong question to ask." He looked slowly across the arc of seats. The Coalition standard was designed by species who evolved with natural advantages: speed, strength, armor, enhanced senses, biological bonding systems. We each built our military doctrines around what we already had when we arrived on the battlefield. He paused. Humans built theirs around what they did not have. The chamber was completely still. Their doctrine is built on the clear assumption that they will be outmatched, outnumbered, under-resourced, and afraid, and that none of those things are sufficient reasons to stop. Their unit cohesion is built not on biological bonds or legal contracts, but on a simple and apparently unshakable belief that you do not leave the person next to you behind, not for a better time, not for a better record, not for anything. He let those words sit in the air for a moment. Their tactical thinking is built on a refusal to accept that any problem is permanently unsolvable. He took a breath. I have observed 31 military cultures in my career. I have never seen one built on this specific foundation, and I want to be fully transparent with this council. When I first arrived on Earth, I found what I observed to be chaotic, irrational, and almost impossible to measure by any standard framework I had available to me. I still find it difficult to measure, but I no longer find it irrational. What I originally read as chaos, I now understand as an adaptability at a level none of our models predicted. What I originally read as irrationality, I now understand as a refusal to be limited by what is only probable. He looked down at the last page of his notes. My formal recommendation is this. Humanity should be granted full coalition military partnership immediately and without reservation, not because they fit the existing model of what a reliable coalition military ally should look like, but because no model we have ever built comes anywhere close to describing what they actually are. He lifted his eyes to the chamber one final time. And my personal note, which is not professional by Jolian standards, and which I am including in the record anyway, is this. I came to this assignment to decide whether humans were ready for the galaxy. I leave this assignment believing the galaxy should feel very glad that they are on our side. The rest of us have simply had longer to practice being afraid of things. He stepped back from the podium. For a long moment, the great chamber was completely silent. Then, the technician in the broadcast booth at the back of the chamber, who had been managing the live transmission link that was kept open to Earth for official record purposes, suddenly realized that the public screen mounted above the council floor had been receiving a live video feed from Fort Solaris Military Academy, where, completely unaware that 47 alien diplomats and commanders were watching them at that exact moment, the graduating class of cadets was in the middle of their graduation ceremony. The enormous screen above the chamber lit up. On it, 400 humans in clean dress uniforms, standing in bright afternoon sunlight, laughing and shouting and throwing their caps high into the air with a wild and joyful energy that no military protocol anywhere in the galaxy had ever officially approved. Loud music was playing. A group of cadets near the back had produced what appeared to be entirely unauthorized fireworks, which were going off in bright, bursting colors against a clear blue sky. Cadet Singh was up on someone's shoulders with both arms raised. Cadet Torres appeared to be leading some kind of call and response chant with a large group around him. Cadet Reyes, still technically on a light-duty recommendation from the medical office following her fever, was running full speed toward a group of her squad mates with her arms wide open and an expression on her face that Vrethak's translator classified, after a brief pause, as pure and total joy. The council chamber watched in complete silence. 31 species of diplomats and military commanders, representing thousands of years of combined civilization across the stars, watched 400 young humans celebrate the thing that had been specifically designed to break them. Then, the eldest delegate of the Thalos people, a woman so old that her rank insignia had been officially redesigned twice during her career, who had fought in 2 wars and personally signed 3 peace treaties, and who appeared in no diplomatic record anywhere for displays of public emotion, began to applaud, slowly at first with both hands. Then the delegate seated next to her joined in, and then the next. The Dravathi block began to knock their broad hands together in a deep and steady rhythm. The Verthani delegates added the low harmonic hum their species used in moments of formal and deep respect. And then the chamber, section by section, filled with the sound of 31 civilizations recognizing something they had not expected to find and were not entirely prepared for on the screen above them. The fireworks were still going off. Vrethak stood at the side of the speaking platform and watched all of it. He felt something settle in his chest, something quiet and warm, and without a proper name in the Jolian language, but which he had been slowly learning to recognize during his time at Fort Solaris. He had borrowed the idea of it from the humans, as he now suspect many things would be borrowed from the humans in the years ahead. They called it pride. He thought it suited the moment exactly.